Welcome to episode 76 of the Sports Geek podcast. On this week's episode, I chat with Dan Migala about the Big Bash League, and I talk to a very special guest that has joined me in Melbourne this week.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, who does card tricks but isn't a magician, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. And yes, my name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and has been a good week for doing the card trick for people who have met me in real life and have been able to get a Sports Geek business card. You'll know my card trick. I will not reveal my secrets. And if you have not received a Sports Geek business card, wait to be dazzled when we do meet in real life. My name is Sean Callanan, at Sean Callanan on the Twitter, or at SportsGeek on Twitter, from sportsgeekhq.com. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode of the Sports Geek podcast. Got a couple of really great guests on this week's show. Dan Migala, lucky enough to catch up with Dan last week when he was in Melbourne to catch up with him and talk about all things Big Bash. Thank you very much to Shane Harmon, another former guest of the podcast, for alerting me that Dan was in town. So we caught up for a chat and talked about the Big Bash cricket, which is a form of cricket that is now in its fourth season, and Dan's been there from the beginning. So we talk about how Big Bash was formed and some of the important things that Cricket Australia were doing and why it was formed. And then after my chat with Dan, I catch up with a very special guest, Christine Stoffel from C Conference, has been out here in Melbourne while all these massive sports events are happening, and I catch up with her briefly to get her opinion of Melbourne, the Melbourne sports scene, and we talk a little bit about Seat London and Seat San Francisco after my chat with Dan Migala. But first, here's my chat with Dan on the Sports Geek podcast. Okay, I'm here on the Hilton on the Park. I think it actually has been renamed, but Google still knows as it Hilton on the Park. Across the road from the MCG, home of cricket and football, and I'm here with a good friend of mine, Dan Migala, you would know him from the Migala Report, been going for 11 years, and also the founding partner of Property Consulting Group. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here at the former Hilton on the Park.
It is. We've taken no, we're still going to pay for these copies. There's no sponsorship here. So Dan, you're in Melbourne and you're sort of touring around Australia at the minute because you've been working with the Big Bash for a couple of years. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the work you've done with Cricket Australia around the Big Bash?
Sure. It's as an American, the first question is, what is an American doing working on cricket? About 6 years ago, actually, I got a call from James Sutherland, CEO of Cricket Australia, to come out here and run a workshop. Yep. Never thought of a cricket match, never, as an American, even growing up, it wasn't part of my vernacular. Came out here and really learned about 2020 and really kind of helped initially, just from a brainstorm standpoint, activation, fan engagement, some of the non-traditional sponsorships that we'll probably, talk about. And then really from there, I probably spent about 2 years working on the incubation of what is now the Big Bash League, which is in its fourth year. I think for my colleagues back home, PCG and our team working with the Big Bash, we kind of really work as an outsourced teambo, an outsourced consultant, that's almost a CMO level responsibility. So our responsibilities with the Big Bash is really around ticket strategy, in-game entertainment, fan engagement, and quite frankly, I think some of the things that you'd see pushing the envelope a little bit, in a very simple form. The Big Bash is not your grandfather's cricket league, and we take the lessons from our work in the NBA, minor league baseball, major league baseball, and the NFL, and really try to translate that here to the wonderful sport of cricket.
Yeah, so for people who aren't Australian in the UK, who know what cricket is and they know what T20, 2020 cricket is, and that's the Big Bash is the league for Australia. So it's effectively a made-for-TV. It's a shortened form of what is one-day cricket, which is normally 50 overs per side. It's boiled down to 20 overs per side. It fits nicely in a TV time slot for 3 hours. It's a good, nice night-only entertainment. So it's really built for that market, and was pretty much built. It's a completely new sport. So it was built up for the Australian market to as an entertainment option across the summer. All new teams were established, new brands, completely green fields. Like we work with the Sydney Thunder for the first couple of years. On what they were doing, and it was completely green fields because you were trying to get fans to identify with teams and start to follow players and understand the new format. So coming from it as completely new sport and trying to take what were best practices from the US and trying to adapt them to the Australian market, what lessons and things did you learn along the way? Getting that to work, because pretty much taking something that works in the US and just dropping it in Australia is sometimes a bit hit and miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And first and foremost, we had to learn cricket, which was a fast education for us. I would say we didn't want to change anything that was great about cricket. We wanted to help it evolve. I think as innovators, that's a great process to think about. For us, I think in initially working on the Big Bash, it was really trying to teach a process of innovation and teach even the executives and even ourselves to think differently. The biggest takeaway that I think your audience would appreciate in any areas of revenue responsibilities in the sports world, we learned it was actually a critical advantage for us in generating revenue that we didn't have a history with the sport. We weren't emotionally tied to it. So I think about my work in baseball and some of the clients that we represent. I grew up with some of these teams, so I know their history, like the back of my hand. And sometimes that can maybe hinder you thinking outside the square, so to speak. And when you think about your job as a marketer, it's not about singing to the church choir the same songs that they want to hear every Sunday. It's how do you recruit new parishioners to be able to come. So I think the objective of Big Bash on a deeper level is very similar to what we see in Major League Baseball right now. There's been some statistical reports that the younger fan base is dropping. And Cricket Australia, I think to their credit, recognized that they were having a similar predicament. Not to mention, it wasn't a place that you would see a lot of females wandering around. It's very statistical, very much, a guy's, night out, so to speak. So I think in some ways that was an advantage, for us to really kind of put ourselves in the mindset of a female, put ourselves in the mindset of a young child, and how do you create an entertainment option that has a cricket match. And I think that process was very important. Now, the big thing is we try to bring that back. We've got a client in the Chicago Bears. The San Antonio Spurs are another example, on some strategy that we've done for them. We try to teach them, okay, imagine you've never been to a Spurs match. And it's hard, for those executives to maybe think that way. But I think if anything, that's been our learning. And now entering year 4 of Big Bash, it's kind of, become a summer staple here already. It's kind of now the challenge is how do you maintain and grow what you've already accomplished too.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely in the first 2 seasons and talking to the guys, and developing it with the guys at the Thunder. It was about Big Bash was an entertainment option first and a sport second. It was like, come for the fun, come for the fireworks. It's, hit and giggle, that kind of thing, and open to families and open to women, and completely different product. And it was really marketed as fun because it was competing against going to the beach, going to the movies, other options like the A-League and tennis and all those things that happen in the summer that Australians know as summer, and it was, that's the way it was marketed, and it did really well to get people in. And then now that we're hitting year 4, we're starting to see that tribal nature and following a team that is very much Australian. And that's what cricket didn't have. It didn't have a club to follow. We all followed the Australian cricket team, and it's one of the most followed cricket teams. It's the Australian cricket team, the Socceroos, that are the most followed teams that we have the, national pride behind. But in cricket, we didn't have teams to follow. And I think, now, there's fans that say, I'm a Hurricanes fan, or I'm a Heat fan, or I'm a Strikers fan, as much as they are a Crows fan or an Eagles fan, or that kind of thing. And that's something that, in 4 years, cricket has established that people are, identifying themselves as that, from a tribal point of view.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and What you said is exactly true, and one of the things that we realized about Australian sport is, to have a city-based team. In the same way that you can walk around with a Detroit Pistons hat on, and in some cases, you're not only a fan of the Pistons, you're a fan of Detroit.
Yep.
So there's city pride, there's community pride, and I think that was one of the strategies going in. So each of the 8 teams obviously have a city name. They're in 6 different markets, 2 in Melbourne, 2 in Sydney. It's by design that I think the Renegades and the Stars have very much of a White Sox Cubs kind of feel to it. The Sixers Thunder, kind of a Lakers Clippers, feel to it, which you can really appreciate. So you're almost invited to participate in a larger community that extends beyond it. I think when we talk at CA and we talk in our office in Chicago about Big Bash, we really look to the lessons from the past. Guys like Bill Veck, of kind of how do you create a match or a game day experience where fans don't go, they might miss something.
Yep.
And I think that that's a great lesson, to apply to the Big Bash. And I think what you said, the green grass, the blank canvas really gave us that ability to learn from these legends and apply that. The line that you said about, it's an entertainment destination that happens to have a sporting event. We learned that from Dr. Jerry Buss, from the Lakers, who invented Showtime,
Yep.
In the 80s. And I think when you take a step back, we're so dependent sometimes on maybe the wins and losses or how the teams do, but there's great history lessons, from some of the legends of the past, and we kind of took little bits and pieces of that, made our own recipe, if you will, and really applied that to what the Big Bash is, and I think is headed to as well.
And so, from a Big Bash point of view, what are some of the stadium activations that you've brought from the US? Like, I go to a lot of games in the US, and every inch of the stadium is activated, and there's things happening. And I think of all the sports around Australia, I think that's one of the things that the Big Bash do so well. And I think it is that entertainment focus, whether it be places where fans can take photos, to motorcycles at half time at the Renegades game, to sitting on the beach at the Thunder game. All of these different ways for the fans to engage or upgrade and be part of it. What are those kind of things that have worked really well for the Big Bash?
Well, I think one, and I can talk about some specific ones, but from a process and education standpoint, it is that Bill Veck quote of like, there's a feeling if you don't go, you're going to miss something. So the challenge for each of the teams is, how do they answer that question? How do they answer that? Big Bash is all about bringing new fans, which is trying to recruit new fans. So, 25% on average of attendees, it's their first cricket match ever.
Yep.
So, what are you doing to kind of wow them? And then that Bill Veck can't miss moment, but then we also mix that with what we call a surprise and delight.
Yep.
So if each Big Bash League team is doing their job, they do have a surprise and delight. So it's not necessarily a cookie cutter, same thing, every game, but what is that different, feel for the fan base? So the Melbourne Renegades, as you pointed out, kind of, they play a lot of AC/DC, blue collar, really kind of identify with their neighborhood of Melbourne. It's no surprise they actually have jumping motorcycles. The Krusty Demons perform at a cricket match.
Yep.
And you think about a moment, this is not your grandfather's cricket match. He'd be, rolling over thinking of the thought of motorcycles jumping, 100-something feet in the air. But you see the smiles on the kids, you see the delight, and it really sets the tone for an amazing evening.
Yep.
Now, the Sydney Sixers, and I mentioned, I think their good brand parallel, would be the Los Angeles Lakers. Much more of a place to be seen in Sydney. It's at the SCG. It's definitely an entertainment destination. And you walk in there, and the first thing that you see is they've got a pink carpet and paparazzi that's taking pictures of the fans. So they make their fans feel almost like celebrities, and it's just a wonderful place, for that target audience that they're trying to do. And I think those little sprinkles and kind of teaching them to innovate a little bit more, slow to go, even though we're just in year 4, but, year 1, I think the fans had a curiosity. Some of the executives did. But now I think with the results, from an attendance standpoint, not to mention the fabulous TV ratings, it's working. And I think creativity fuels more creativity, when done right. You're like, okay, what's the next thing that we can do? We should listen to our fans. What else could we do to execute it where they're really starting to get it?
Yep. And I think the fact that you were talking about the TV ratings, so the first 2 years, for the people who don't know, the first 2 years were on pay TV, on Fox Sports, and they did a great job of covering the sport. The penetration of that is around 25-30% of Australians. So not everyone got to see Big Bash, but in the last 2 years, Channel 10 has been running, and it's been running on free-to-air, and pretty much Big Bash is on every single night, and it's live, which really which really makes the teams and the people running it. You have to step up your game. You have to provide that extra thing. So whether it is, I think last year the Stars did it, where they had a water slide at the MCG, where the kids could go on a hot day, watch the cricket and do water and have a water slide there. So you've got to, we always talk about FOMO, that fear of missing out, and same sort of, the quote you were talking about before. You've got to provide these extra things to go, why are you there? And I was at the Renegade Stars game the other day with my uncle, and he brought his two kids, and I've got my little cousin there, and every time the scoreboard went up, he was holding up his sign. Then the thunder sticks were asked to, make some more noise, and he went through about 8 sets of thunder sticks. He kept breaking them, but that was his first game, and now that he's going to be tugging on his dad's shirt to say, when are we going to another game? And it's just a matter of getting that fan on the journey to say, I'm going to start going to cricket. And then, in 5 or 6 years' time, when he's old enough, he can go to a one-day match and potentially getting him into the traditional cricket fan of Test match cricket.
And that's another important lesson. I think a lot of the it's the long-term view, right? I think a lot of the organizations that we work with, have short-term revenue goals, and we all are accountable to a CFO at some level, right? But what's happened there and what you just described, the longer term view, that's really important to sport and fan development. And that's something that I'd say beyond the discipline that I talked about before, that's the other lesson that I've really gotten out of this experience of working on Big Bash and with Cricket Australia is, if I was sitting with James Sutherland 5 years ago, he was thinking about what does the sport look like in 2015.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important lesson for marketers. We're all, immediate gratification. I've worked in organizations and certainly understand the pressure on a ticketing executive of how are we going to sell out tickets for Tuesday night. Then I'm going to worry about Wednesday night's game and just trying to go through that. But to take a step back and have almost a short, medium, long version of goals, and then the lens of the fan and understanding that, I think it's really important. I think a lot of that happens at the league level much more than the team, but the fan development, the fan engagement, it's really important in the life cycle of any sport.
Yeah, the long view, and I take the long view also on the digital in the fact that you can take the short view of how many likes, how many follows that we've got on all the different platforms, but the longer view is that multiple pieces of content are going to build up that relationship with that fan, and it's a matter of building up that trust of the fan, getting them to like your content, getting them to be engaged, and then that brings them to the game. Yes, you might do that one post that sells the ticket, but it's the 100 posts prior to that that get them there. And Gary Vaynerchuk, calls it that jab, right hook, right? And that's what sports can do. They can be jabbing all the time, producing this great content. And that right hook is buy a ticket, or even better, buy a membership, or even better that just hand over your credit card and give it back to me when I'm dead. That's the goal of all of us. If you get them on a season ticket holder or a membership, it's a matter of keep delivering that value, both from the content you produce, but then also the what you produce at the stadium and what you deliver there.
Absolutely, and it's really that mindset. And if you can imagine each game that you present or each touch point, that's the first time that a fan is touching your brand, you'll never take them for granted. And I think that's a wonderful way to be. And I think, that's another lesson from here, and that's the longer view, right? Because they'll stay with you, and the dynamics of fans are changing. I think historically, when we even look back at some of the perspective of, there is no precedent really for launching a league. Not many people have had the opportunity to go through that experience, but so when you look at teams that maybe were expansion teams or just those learnings, it was really having conversations with the fans, not at them. And I think that, when you are at the top of the mountain or the dominant team with a lot of members, you can have one-way communication. But how wonderful would it be if you could do that and have a conversation with them and engage with them? So, when you compete and you try to grab new fans like the Big Bash is, it's all these teams didn't exist 5 years ago. And it's just a wonderful thing to then see, but then apply that process to other areas of fan engagement too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Big Bash had to do it because they had no fans. Like, they were in that recruiting mode. And the biggest lesson that I've had, from the work we did with the Thunder is, if you're an established team or an established brand, you should still be doing those same things. You're always recruiting new fans. You're always trying to engage those fans and bring those fans back. So, try to stay in that greenfields mode as much as possible, because then you are listening and not getting into that broadcast mode, talking at the fans, not with the fans.
Yeah, there's a reason that the positions are called fan development, not fan maintenance, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if you observe a lot of teams, sometimes they would admit they're probably guilty of that. But maybe this conversation, in the perspective of the Big Bash, will inspire people a lot more to continue to develop their fans as well.
And even if it is just certain, portions of your week or certain content plays or engagement plays that are focused on that you'll start seeing the insights of why you go about doing it, and you'll start doing it more, rather than having the fear of got to do it all the time. Start having those town hall type meetings with your fans. You can do it on Twitter. You can have Q&As on Facebook. You can have private fan councils where they're using technology that allows you to do it, or just have those. Invite 50 fans and get them to give you your feedback. It's been, it's exceptionally valuable. You have to do it when you're in greenfields because you need to know what you need to do. But doing it when you've got your brand established, you find, new products that you can sell, new variations to ticketing that you can do from that kind of feedback.
Yeah, absolutely, and it transcends maybe even wins and losses too, right? It's just fans want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And if you give them that platform to do it, the teams with history should be, really studying the Big Bash and applying that, because they're well ahead of the game, right? Because people know who they are. So, But then the ability to have that outreach, I couldn't agree more.
And so another thing I want to talk to you about, your background in partnerships and sponsorship. You were VP of creative partnerships at the Padres for a while. How have you seen the sponsorship game and it sort of change over the last 5 to 10 years from a sports side of things?
I think for us, at least in North America, we went through our economic crisis. Yep. I think that was a watershed moment where the accountability for those dollars became so much greater. So, I think looking back even on the programs and the partnerships that I worked on, back then versus now, the level of accountability to not just an ROI, but, to making a business case is 10 times greater, than it was back then. Now you have the ability to either, look back and think to the good old days, yep, or embrace the fact that, this is a tremendously exciting time, because I think it really opens up the doors to new categories, and new partnerships. One great example that our office just worked on in minor league baseball, actually just did the largest partnership in the 100-plus year history of minor league baseball. And it's really inventory that doesn't even exist. And it was a partnership with DeVry University that's going to provide education opportunities, for players of minor league baseball as well as staff, at discounted rates. Kind of borrows a program that they have with the USOC, the United States Olympic Committee. Yep. But it'll bring new content to them and engagement. And that dialogue is less about the value of the signage on the wall, or the traditional maybe metrics, but it'll drive ROI back to them, in a creative way. So those types of programs take a little bit more time, but I would say again, I'm very process oriented person, and trying to kind of repeat the process. I think a deal like that, or some of the other ones that I've been involved with at that level, it starts with the question of, if I owned this company and I owned minor league baseball, what would I do to grow their business? And not, thinking about in terms of, here's the deck, are you in?
Yep.
And, more cookie cutter approach. So it really requires you to be nimble and become an expert, maybe in that potential partner's business in a different way. And what I've also noticed too, maybe in comparison to 10 years ago, in a pitch like that, a financial person tends to be in the room, where 5 years ago it was purely marketing or advertising, sponsorship decision maker. So there's a clear understanding of, we usually split it up into direct revenue results and then indirect revenue. Try to show much more of a predictive ROI off of it. Some is just a roll of the dice at a certain point, but you have an expectation of what it could be. But there is a strategic way to kind of identify it, and I think that's what people really want to respond to.
And the thing is that what has evolved in the last 5 to 10 years is the tools around data and acquisition of data, and that's now that more and more sponsors are coming to sports. Always been attracted by the big fan bases, but now they've been qualified. They can see how many fans are following the teams and liking them and bringing people in the gate, and they don't want to just be the sign on the wall. They want sales leads. They want customer acquisition. Now they can go off to Google or they can go off to Facebook and get it that way.
Yep.
And they don't need sport. Like they can say, oh, we've got a product that works well. It's in New York. We're going to target Yankee fans. We're going to do it via Facebook. We're going to run a campaign. They don't need the Yankees to do that. So it's really on the sports teams to be innovative enough to say, here's how you can do it inside our system with our processes and get those acquisitions, as well as having the association with our brand in a tighter way.
Exactly.
So,
well, yeah, and I think teams fear what they don't understand, right? So I think part of that is an education of them understanding what's out there. I'll use the Chicago Bears as a great example. The Cleveland Browns are actually are in the same boat as well, but they're using cookie and pixeling technology to really grab data around their fans and aligning that with different data points where they're able to understand more about their fans' purchasing behavior, a lot of shopper data.
Yep.
Actually, I'll give an example of the Browns in a second too, of prospecting. But what the Bears have done is then they aggregate all this data and they've created essentially a digital network for their fans. So now, let's say their retail partner, their grocery store, that has a sponsorship with them. The Bears have the largest grocery deal in the NFL. Traditionally, they might only activate 7 months out of the year. They still have to sell groceries in the 5 months that the Bears aren't playing, right? So the ability for them then to do a media buy through the Bears is a new revenue stream that if I'm another team, I'm following, that. So they don't want that grocery store spending that money with the Chicago Tribune or radio. They should buy it through the Bears' own proprietary digital fan network.
Yep.
Leverage the marks, leverage the assets, because I think you're right. I mean, some of those other, digital companies are grabbing, those brand dollars in different budgets, and that's one example. The other one that I really like as well. The Cleveland Browns did that same process. In the night of the draft, Johnny Manziel gets drafted, so a lot of attention.
Yep.
I'd kind of classify it as the entertainment seeker, right? Mm-hmm. Starting to come in, and they had let's just easy math, 1 million fans come to their site. Next morning, analyst looks at all the data, and because it links into credit card and grocery purchases, they're able to understand that Purina dog food is indexing, I think, at like 175%. Monday morning, the sponsorship person gets that report, and then they reach out to Purina using data that was aggregated to go sell a new partner. And that's just another different way of doing it. And that's the kind of stuff I think it's attached to real revenue. In my conversations with NFL CEOs, that's the stuff that they understand. It's not so much maybe about likes for them. It's about, getting that revenue, but aligning digital innovation with new revenue streams too.
But that's the thing. You've got that, everyone's got that data sitting there. If you've set up, whether it be the pixeling or the domain insights on your site, Zuck is very free in sharing that data with advertisers. And if you get on that side of things, it's very powerful just from a sponsor acquisition and understanding your fans. I'm super looking forward to the audience insights that currently are in the US from a Facebook point of view that currently aren't completely rolled out here in Australia. But you can, like you just said, what are our fans? Who's potentially buying a car? What's their household income? What's their education level? You can get all of that stuff at a really granular level, and it does give you that kind of information that says the people who visited the site are indexing on Purina dog food or whatever. And as a sponsorship person, if you're in that space, you're way in front of everybody else to be able to go to them to say, you're already answering the question that their first question is going to be, have you got our customers? If you're ringing up and saying, we've got your customers, you're a fair way down the track of getting it over the line.
Absolutely. So we have a current client in the NBA, and this is an ongoing partnership pitch they're going through. So I'll talk broadly, but as an example, you mentioned the auto category, right? Auto dealers and auto manufacturers know the first thing that you do when you're starting to think about going for a car. You're kind of browsing online, searching for it, looking at comparables and all of that. So that same process of pixeling that we've done for this particular NBA team, they were going to pitch a luxury car category. So we're able to give them data that not only do we know who's in the market for buying a car, but these particular people, we have 16,000 people that we know are looking to buy a luxury car. And we could do, essentially a customer acquisition strategy, leveraging the marks for them. It's no longer about reaching the mass audience of hopes that, we're going to be able to reach them.
If you can sell, 200 cars, they're ticking the box straight away.
And on a deeper level, not only do you get the sponsorship revenue, but then you're able to geo-target each of those individuals. You might live on the north side of town, which is represented by a different dealer group than me on the south side of town. So the dealer group in your neighborhood is serving you with different media when you go on to check your horoscope in the morning. And I mean, it was a wonderful conversation with this club because they don't know what they didn't know, right? Yep. And they were worried. They went from are we able to get this luxury car company as a sponsor to that wonderful, confident feeling of you know what, these guys are idiots if they don't sign this deal. And that's confidence, right? And that's what you want out of your salespeople is that swagger. And I think if anything, 2015, when we're sitting, or a year from now, when we're sitting at whatever this hotel is named at this time, those are the success stories that I think you're going to start to see because that aligns digital with revenue, real revenue opportunities.
Well, I've got to wrap this up because we've both got to head to meetings. Where can people find you online, read the Migala report, those kind of things?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is Dan Migala, Migala. And we've got the Migala report, same Twitter handle, the Migala report as well. And I'll be traveling, obviously, out through Australia through the end of the month and then, back to the day job, so to speak, in the U.S. So look forward to it. And thanks so much for all you do for the industry, too.
Sign up for the Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/SGN.
Thanks again to Dan Migala at Dan Migala on Twitter. As I've said before, if you're not following guys like Dan Migala on Twitter, you're just not doing Twitter correctly. And check out some of the pictures from the recent Big Bash game that I went to. And I went to with this very special guest that's come all the way from Phoenix, Arizona, and lucky enough to meet in person. And we've been able to speak. Christine Stoffel from Seat. Thank you for being on the Sports Geek podcast in person in my hometown.
Well, thank you very much for hosting me. You have an amazing hometown.
Well, that's the thing. So Christine contacted me, what was it 10 days ago or something,
Right.
saying, been offered to go to the tennis. What about I come down to the tennis and we'll do some brainstorming around seat? And so I moved your travel schedule up to coincide with what's been happening this week.
Yes.
So for all those people who attended Sports Business Melbourne, so we set up a meetup group, Sports Biz Melbourne. We had about 35 people in attendance. So I picked you up on Tuesday morning at 6 a.m.
6 a.m., bright and early.
And then by 6 p.m. we were out at work, and we had a really good group. As an outsider coming in, and being your first experience with the sports business community in Melbourne, what were some of your takeaways from just that initial meetup and meeting some sports execs in Melbourne?
So first of all, it was absolutely fantastic to be able to network with this group, and they were so embracing. They're curious about what's going on, in the States with technology. They're curious about some of the topics are going to be at SEAT. And then when you and I were talking to the group and telling them that it's just not sports, but it's sports and entertainment, and it spreads across, USTA and NASCAR and, LPGA and, every single sport and racing. They were so excited that it was, these collaborative discussions. I've never felt so welcomed in any one spot than I have this week, and especially at that networking event. That group was amazing.
And it was a really good mix. We had, and I'm going to give Jen a shout out, Jen Simmons from racing, because she promoted it far and wide, brought in her old crew from netball and
Yes.
some people from racing, and she got Ash from Melbourne United over the line as well. We were having a chicken parmigiana, which is what you've got to do. I made sure Christina's taken in the culinary delights of Melbourne at the Honey Bar. And you were saying it was that night was very much like the events at SEAT and the collaboration and the sharing of ideas.
It was this group, and what I have found, being here this week, they are the representation of SEAT, and they will. This is what it's all about. It's about collaboration and open communication and networking and sharing. And even though you don't know someone, meeting them for the first time and being open to those conversations. And this is the perfect group to go to SEAT.
Yeah. So our week has been in planning mode for both SEAT London. So SEAT London is going to be at March 17 at Lord's Cricket Ground. I'm very, very lucky and very humbled to be asked to go and present SEAT in its best light, and that's what we want to do. We want people who are listening in the UK to understand the culture of SEAT, and I think that's one of the things from all the discussions we've had
Yes.
with people. And Bill Albanus, we met up for lunch yesterday. He said, one of the biggest things is the culture that SEAT helps develop in organisations. So, just framing, here we are saying it's sports and it's tech and it's digital and it's CRM. It's as much the collaboration of those departments is some of the biggest takeaways from SEAT.
Absolutely, it is. And that's what everybody seems to be really excited about. That's what everybody that has attended SEAT in the SEAT community, their reason to coming back is multidimensional. It's the networking, it's the collaboration. They meet people for the first time, and they're lifelong friends. This is truly an international community at SEAT. And, so what's happened this week in all the conversations that we've had and I've been so excited, and it has just warmed my heart to know that Australia is embracing the culture of SEAT. Yep. I mean, with every ounce of their passion.
Yeah, so we were lucky enough, earlier in this podcast, I caught up with Dan Migala. He was kind enough to invite us, and Clint Cooper, the Stars CEO, invite us to the Big Bash game. So you were able to see the MCG in all its glory. It was absolutely a cracking game. The Scorchers put on a really big total. We had the MCG Seagull, and I'll put links in the show notes. And our US
Yes.
friends would have already seen this because it's made it to ESPN, where the Seagull gets unfortunately struck by the cricket ball, and the Rob Quiney picks it up and puts it over the side, and then we just hear this roar from the crowd, and no one knew what it was, and the Seagull was up and about again. So it was a real feel good story. And then a smashing finish. What was your I talked to Dan about how Big Bash was an entertainment option first, and real a whole event, you got to see it for the first time, not knowing cricket, and I was, doing my best to explain the rules. How did you feel about that event?
I was really taken back by the family event, and it is truly a family sport. And I thought that was a brilliant way for the value, presenting a value to the families, to entertain them, to introduce.
That's all right, Christine. You were meant to put your phone on silent. These things happen when you're podcasting. You're a busy woman. People are always going to trying to contact you, but it helps with the live aspect of the podcast. We're not stopping. It really catered for a family event. And we were lucky enough to catch up with Anthony Everard from Cricket Australia while there, and he was talking about how they've framed it and how they're constantly refining it and developing the event to make sure that it's both family friendly and female friendly. Like they've boosted their attendance and watching in the female demographic with females, but they want to continue to grow that and try to tweak the product. So even though it's in year 4. It's constantly evolving.
And what I've discovered about cricket is, in talking with the Lord's Cricket Ground and Derek Brewer, the CEO over there, and we are hosting the event, in London there, and learning a little bit about cricket and the history is, one of the challenges of the cricket world is to bring in the young and introduce them into the sport and make it more of a family event. And that's what I saw here. And it was absolutely so passionate.
And it was, and it is playing the long game. So it is about getting young kids playing cricket, both boys and girls, getting them involved in a short form game. So Big Bash, and as Dan explained, it's a short form. It takes great for TV, and the ratings have been great. But it gets the kids on, and then they can move to longer forms of the game. So that takes us to to recap our week. That takes us to Thursday, and we did a few tours and caught up with the guys at the Melbourne Storm, and then went to the Asian Cup game at the Melbourne Rectangular Stadium, as it's been rebranded. And Michael Brown, the CEO of the Asian Cup, and Natalie Brown from Melbourne Storm were kind enough to invite us and host us for that game, seeing Korea play Uzbekistan of all teams. So it was no Australian team were playing, and near capacity, 24,000 people at the stadium. We were sitting behind a very passionate group of Korean supporters with their thundersticks and constant screaming and things like that. But they were all in. Again, do you want to give us your insights into that game and the stadium and things like that?
Yeah, and it was actually fun to sit in the seats and watch it from a fan perspective. We don't get to do that very much. So watching these fans and how passionate they are about their team and what's going on the field was absolutely, so thrilling for me. And the experience alone, I think that it was so well done. The mascot was
Nutmeg was the star of the show.
Nutmeg was definitely the star of the show. Absolutely, just a hoot to watch. So from an experience perspective, it was fantastic. Absolutely, the venue outstanding.
Yeah, and it was really good to catch up with Michael, and just check in on the success. 480 million. The game after that one, Australia was playing China.
Yes,
and Michael saying that there was a proposed 480 million people watching that game in China. And we spoke before Christmas, and there was still that fear, 25 days out, will we sell tickets? Will people turn up? And he said one of the key successes for the tournament overall was really engaging those communities. And we were discussing, wondering how many of the Korean fans had flown in or were tourists, and how many were Australian, Korean Australians, that obviously wanted to support their home country. And we were just doing rough estimates, and I asked Michael the same question. He goes, well, it would be about 90%. That would be mainly, Korean Australians. So it's almost like, if there are 15,000, Korean Australians in the Melbourne region, like 14,000 of them decided to turn up to that match. And he said, the engagement of the communities has been the one of the key planks of success, because they didn't have the big budget to splash all over the papers and large TVC campaigns. And he told the story of the Iranian community in Melbourne and Victoria, and he handed over 8,000 tickets to leaders in the Iranian community, and they came back with all the money to the dollar for every single ticket. And
incredible.
That's an amazing group ticket sales story. So,
and I think it's a lessons learned, for everyone in the industry, is to look beyond, look deep into the communities to find those untapped market segments and people that are interested in the sport that you just haven't tapped. I think it's absolutely something that we need to be looking closer at.
So we are recording this before heading into the tennis, the last stop of the Christine Stoffel Melbourne tour, and hopefully catching up with a few more friends. I've no doubt we'll be running into a few people that I know, and we'll check out all the activations there. So be sure you're following Christine on Twitter, CBRCIO.
Mm-hmm.
She will be doing more on Instagram. She posted her first Instagram this week with some very beautiful ladies at the Asian Cup game, and great to meet them. So we're sharing more of that. Quickly before we wrap up this podcast and head to the tennis, just your impressions of how the planning sessions and things, your vibe for both London, March 17, and then in July in San Francisco. How are things going? How are things on track for the two conferences this year?
Very excited. You and I have had some incredible brainstorming sessions and collaboration, and we've done some whiteboarding and have really mapped out not just this year's conferences, but many years in the future. And and taking this globally and pulling in the global seat community, which is very, very exciting. But March, for the March 17th and at Lord's Cricket Ground, we have pretty much fine-tuned and finished the agenda. We have some incredible speakers coming in from the U.S., all over the world, really. And then we are mapping out what's going to be in San Francisco. I think one of the best conferences that we have put on to date. Every year, we continue to raise the bar. And every year, the day after the conference, I look and go, oh no, how are we going to match this?
Yep.
Well, we're matching it and we're exceeding it.
And so part of this trip has been brainstorming and planning session,
Yes.
but it's also been a recruiting trip.
Absolutely.
And so this is a really strong call out to listeners in Australia and New Zealand. We were talking to Shane Harmon yesterday, who unfortunately couldn't get across, but we called him because we're close enough to his part of the world.
Yes.
And Christine, we really want more Australian and New Zealand attendees. Christine's been blown away by both the sharing and some of the innovation that's happening in Melbourne and around Australia. So please go to the show notes, contact me, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. We've got a special offer for Sports Geek listeners and first-time attendees from Australia and New Zealand. We definitely want you there. And if you want to send multiple people, which is what we are suggesting with everybody, you can't clone yourself. You can't be in all sessions.
No.
The CIO track, the CRM track, the digital track, they're well worth attending. And if we get all the speakers and knock off all the topics that we've written down,
Yes.
It's terrific from a professional development point of view, but I also think it's that get a little bit of that seat culture into your organization and get that collaboration happening between those departments. So please, if you need help in getting the case across to your boss, to your partners and those kind of things to make the case to go to seat in San Francisco, please reach out to us. We are more than happy to have you there. And also, if you've got a killer case study, if you've done something and you're super proud of it, and we've seen some great case studies this week, they're the things we want to also showcase at seat
Absolutely.
and in the discussions.
Yeah, this Australian market, and what I have learned this week is your sports organizations out here are doing some phenomenal work, and it needs to be shared. It needs to be shared with the rest of the world seat community, because there's a lot of things that we can learn from each other, and that's what seat is all about.
So that's it for this week. You can find out all the information about seat at the SEAT website, seatconsortium.com, or you can simply go to sportsgeekhq.com, seat 2015. It'll direct you directly there. All information about the special offers will be in the show notes for this episode, sportsgeekhq.com/76. If you've got this far in the podcast, I thank you very much for listening. If you could leave us an iTunes review, I would very much appreciate it. I'm really knocking that down and asking people for the iTunes review. So if you enjoy the podcast, it does help more people find it. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes to leave a review. And that's it from me, at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek. Please send me a tweet or send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com. I'm more than willing to take on board your suggestions for future topics and future guests. Christine Stoffel, thank you very much for coming down to Melbourne and spending the week. It's been an absolute blast. I'm looking forward to March in London and in San Francisco.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Melbourne.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Did you know Sports Geek Podcast has listeners in over 50 countries? Thank you for sharing. Like the Sports Geek Podcast? Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sportsgeek. Thank you for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.